There is a moment on sales calls when things get weird. The customer hesitates, the salesperson gets nervous, and all of a sudden, no one is acting like a human being anymore. That's what we're talking about today. So, the first way that people handle objections, and I am not encouraging this, but it is one of the most popular ways, is to just be a jerk, just making them feel awful about not wanting to invest in their business or themselves or their health or their weight or their marriage, whatever it is. They just make you feel really bad about it. Okay, so I'm just saying you don't put people into a corner to make a decision. You're gonna help them think through the decision. That's the biggest piece for this. We're not gonna be a jerk. We're not putting them in a corner. We're gonna help them think through a decision. And we'll talk about that more as we go on, but that's the biggest teaching point right here.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Sippin Matcha and helping you make more sales. And about the time that it takes you to enjoy your matcha or coffee break, our resident sales expert, Brooke Greening, gives you some great advice on moving your sales conversations forward. Because if you have to talk to people to make sales, how well you lead those conversations directly impacts your revenue. So let me give you an invitation here right at the start. We'd encourage you to subscribe, to like, to add, to leave us a review. If you're finding value in this podcast, we'd love to hear from you, and Brooke would love to know what's going well for you. How you doing, Brooke?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you, Scott. How are you doing? Got my iced matcha today.
Yes, it's the surface of it's actually a little better today, but it's been very hot and muggy the last few days.
Yeah, they canceled a lot of the fireworks and parades and all of that because it was just so hot in Philadelphia. It's sad because it was America's 250th.
It was, yeah. And we had the joyous experience of trying to wait out a thunderstorm for 45 minutes with the kids in the minivan. And then my patience ran out and I said, we're going home.
But we did have glow sticks, and so they all said that was fantastic.
Yes, so we had a mini rave at our house when we got home. Last week, we talked about identifying objections. That's the part of the sales framework that we're on. And you've got a little bit of a different take on it. A lot of people often think objections are rejection, but you actually say that they help us in conversation. They provide us information. They let us know a lot about them, and we should actually ask for them with that.
Yeah, because actually objections, like you said, are information. So it is not our job to avoid them. We want to understand them. That is the biggest piece with objections.
Right. And so that sounds super easy to understand. And I know you do this really well, but for most of us mere mortals, the idea of objections gets us really nervous. It sounds super simple. And so sometimes things get a little weird.
Yeah, a lot of times that sounds really good until someone actually raises a concern, and then that's when things kind of start going off the rails at that point.
Yeah, it's sort of that Mike Tyson quote of everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Today, we're going to focus on some of the ways that, like, when we have those nervous moments or we're not quite sure how to handle them properly, what that looks like. So what's the first one?
So the first way that people handle objections, and I am not encouraging this, but it is one of the most popular ways, is to just be a jerk. Like you're basically manipulating them. And this is the one that, in regards to good humans, they hate. And so they feel like that's the only way to handle objections. But that's when someone is sharing a concern and they're trying to think through it, and the salesperson is more of a jerk. They're just like, okay, if the potential customer is saying, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know if that's going to be the best ROI, or they raise any type of objection, then they turn back and they're like, oh, well, then I guess you're just, okay, staying stuck then. Or if they're like, well, I'm trying to figure out like how much this is going to cost each month, then they say something like, well, you told me that this was really important. How has that changed? Like they are just a jerk. And they've been trained to put you in a corner to feel bad, to basically just beat you down until you say yes. It is effective. I do not recommend it, and I do not use it with any of my clients, nor with our potential clients that we're talking to. Just because it can work doesn't mean it's going to build the relationship that you want. In fact, it actually sets you up for failure. But I'm not going to argue and say it doesn't work at all, because if it didn't work at all, then no one would do it.
Yeah, I think it can work. How effective it is for your long-term business goals and all of that, we could debate.
I do not agree to this.
But basically, you're feeling like you got put in a corner and you don't have a good answer.
Yeah, and sometimes people are actually training you to get into that corner. The questions that they're asking you, so if you go back to previous podcasts and we talk about uncovering the real problem, verbalizing the value, they're actually trained to get you to say certain things so that when the objection comes up, they're like all ready to go and they can fight it. And that is not the goal of a sales conversation. We're trying to uncover the problems they have and see if we can be a resource. If we can, great. Let's talk about it. If we can't, then let's give them other resources. And so it's just completely the opposite. But one of them is just being a jerk, just making them feel awful about not wanting to invest in their business or themselves or their health or their weight or their marriage, whatever it is. They just make you feel really bad about it.
Yeah, and this is sort of the classic, like, why people hate salespeople and why
Oh, yeah.
at family conversations it gets awkward and all of that of manipulation and mistreating people. And almost everyone universally says that they don't like this. And yet, so many salespeople end up doing it for a lot of reasons. And maybe in a future episode we could talk about the reasons why, but
That'd be good. Could I put my counseling hat on? That would be fun.
There we go. Everybody, I think, instinctually knows this one. Don't be a manipulator. Don't be a jerk. We've all seen it. We've all experienced. There's a good chance if you've had a sales conversation with somebody, you're gonna have it this week. So what should we learn from this? What are you telling us?
Okay, so I'm just saying you don't put people into a corner to make a decision. You're going to help them think through the decision. That's the biggest piece for this. We're not going to be a jerk. We're not putting them in a corner. We're going to help them think through a decision. And we'll talk about that more as we go on, but that's the biggest teaching point right here.
Great. So what's the next poor example of that? So everybody, I think, for the most part, I would anticipate almost everybody that listens to this podcast agreeing with the first one.
Yeah, otherwise they'll just unsubscribe, and that's fine.
have a nice life. We'll see you. So
okay, so then the next one is, I call it the ostrich. They avoid it. You know how they stick their head in the sand and their whole body is sticking out, but their head is in the sand. That's what we're talking about. So this is what's happening on the opposite extreme. So sometimes the objections comes in. We've already talked about it. People just plow through it. They're a jerk. This one is where they avoid it. So they raise a concern and we just pretend it didn't happen. We swing all the way to the other side. So they say, hey, I'm not sure. We have the budget. Then we're like, okay, no problem. I'll just send a proposal over. We didn't uncover that objection. We didn't understand what was going on with that objection. We're just kind of like, oh, no, okay, we'll just do this. Or they're going to hold off. And they're like, okay, yeah, great. Just call me if something changes. That is just completely avoiding it. And that's not going to help you either.
yeah, and when we avoid it, you're not dealing with it. It's all sitting and it's still there. And so assuming the person hasn't gotten help from someone else, which they probably have, but if you go back, they're probably going to say something very similar again because you never dealt with it the first time. And so then you're kind of in this weird loop of hoping for a miracle that they've just changed their mind when you didn't have to talk about it.
Yeah. And a lot of times people are they're so nervous or they just don't want that awkward moment of what it's going to look like if you have a question, because they feel like a question is confrontational. And that's where it's not. And we're going to talk about that later, but it's okay to have a question. I encourage questions during this time, not the manipulating ones, but ones trying to understand what is going on with that objection. What is it that they might be unclear about? What is it that they have concerns about? That's really important. And so the big takeaway is you can't understand an objection that you refuse to explore or understand.
Yeah, and I think that goes for both sides. Both you get more information about what they're thinking about, and a lot of times you end up helping your customer think more clearly about what they're actually thinking and feeling because you've had a good, healthy conversation and you've brought self-awareness to the issue.
Yeah. The other thing I would encourage when we say avoid is we always encourage our clients, you need to ask for the objection. That is what you need to do every single time. And there's lots of reasons to do that. And we'll be talking about that in these coming episodes. But when you don't ask for the objection, you are completely avoiding it. So when clients come to me and they're like, hey, I had a great conversation. This is where we're going. And I say, okay, but what were the objections? They're like, oh, they didn't have any. They did. If they didn't buy, there was an objection. And so avoiding it is not only just trying to skirt around it really quickly, but it's also just not even asking for it.
Yeah, so that's a great teaser. So make sure you have subscribed and turn your notifications on, all that type of stuff, because next week Brooke's gonna help you know how to do that. What's the third way that people? Okay, we know we don't want to be the manipulator. People may be sitting there and I'm the avoider. Like I just tried to avoid it at all case. But there's another option. What's that?
Yeah, this is the storyteller. This is rushing to the solution. So when we talk about objections, you're a jerk about them, you try to push them in a corner, you try to avoid them, or we try to help people to think how good their life is going to be when that result is solved. That is not necessarily wrong, but this is not the place we do that. So that's mistake number 3. We rush to the solution. So then we just try to help them feel better about the concern that they have. So if they're like, "Hey, I'm worried this is gonna take too much time," we'll be like, "Oh, but it's gonna be worth it. Just imagine where you're gonna be 6 months from now." Or they're saying, "Hey, I'm just not sure if the program is the right fit. Hey, I totally understand. Let me tell you a little bit about some of our success stories." We rush to the solution instead of actually exploring what that objection is. And that will hurt us because that's not where they're at this point. It's not that you don't want them to see the value in it. You absolutely do, but not in this moment. So many times we rush, and that's what hurts us. And that's what actually causes them to not trust us as much anymore. Because then they're like, okay, you're just like everybody else. You're just a little bit nicer, or you're just a little bit more patient. So that's mistake number 3, rushing to the solution. We do that usually with good intentions, but it's not a good idea.
Yeah, that idea of skipping over the concern. And I find myself, I know when people begin to do that and they're focusing on painting the picture of what it'll be like. Well, wouldn't you want well, of course I want that, but I don't think you're really listening to that's
Right.
great. I've got
Right.
a lot of questions of between now and
Right.
where that is. And
It's the nice manipulator, actually. Like, that's
Right.
what's actually happening. We're saying, no, I'm not going to be a jerk about it, but yet we're still kind of doing it.
All right, help us think through a little bit of how do we frame this? How could we, not so much how, but what's the takeaway, the lesson from this idea of the storyteller, the rush to the solution person?
Yeah. When we do that, we're going to skip what they've said. And then we're not going to have the information that we need. We're not going to be able to continue to build that trust. Hope matters when we're talking in regards to them making a decision, wanting to be able to work with us. I'm not saying we don't want to give them hope, but they need to understand before they're ready for that hope. And in the moment of the objection, it's not usually the hope that's getting in the way. And so if we're just trying to paint this great picture of what it's going to look like, we're missing where they're at. So many times we are like 2 to 3 steps ahead of them in what we want them to do. And if we would just take a moment and come back to where they're at, that's how we're able to actually walk together through making that decision and moving forward instead of us trying to jump and get them to do what we just want them to do because we want to make a sale.
So I'm feeling, and we even highlighted some of the connections and that before, but that all of these things, they're different, but they're connected. They all come from similar sort of places.
Yeah. So we end up doing 3 things. We either fight them, we either avoid the objections, or we rush to fix them. That and none of them are actually saying, we're just going to sit here in the objection and try to understand it more. We either fight it, we avoid it, or we rush to fix it. And that's where it gets us in trouble.
Yeah, and so that's the common thread is we don't understand. We think we have to have the perfect response. We think we have to have the slick objection arguments and all of that, but we need something actually different.
Yeah. And they need to understand the concern. We need to understand the concern well enough to see if we can help someone make a confident decision. That is our goal. We are trying to help them make a good decision. And again, if we are honorable salespeople, sometimes that might not be us. We may be realizing in this moment, okay, this isn't exactly the right thing. And we will talk about that. What do we do if we realize this isn't right? It doesn't mean we start slashing prices. It doesn't mean we just give up. There are different ways to help walk through what they actually need instead of what we want for them.
So we're making the case here to listen next week to find out how to do all these things. But when you approach things a little differently, what does that look like?
You're not guessing anymore. When you make the decision to have maybe that little bit of uncomfortableness, because it is a little uncomfortable when you're maybe asking a question or sitting in the objection and not trying to run around it, you're not wondering anymore. You're not wondering if they're going to work with you. You're not wondering what their time frame is. You're not wondering why they disappeared. You're not trying to read between the lines because you were able to have a real conversation about the concern they have and you understand where they're coming from and they also understand what you can provide for them. It takes the guessing out. So many times I'm working with clients and they're like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they said that. I don't know why they're not responding to my proposals. I do. We didn't understand what was going on in the objections. And that is where things can really fall off the rails. It doesn't have to be really uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be manipulating at all. It's just we need to continue to have a real conversation in this moment and not all of a sudden not know how to talk.
All right, so I'm going to ask you to put your counselor hat on. And if somebody's going and they're listening to this, they've identified themselves with maybe one or two, probably not three, but maybe one or two of these mistakes. What questions could we ask to figure out where they're at?
Yeah. So when you hear an objection, and please understand anything besides not yes. Let's send their proposal. Let's set the date. Let's sign the contract. Anything like I want to think about it. I need to talk to my business partner. Like all of those are considered objections. Anytime you hear those, just ask yourself, am I getting curious about it? Am I getting defensive about it? Or am I trying to avoid it altogether? Those are the three questions. Like, where are you at in that moment? Do you get curious about what it is? Are you getting defensive and or are you trying to avoid it? And defensive can sometimes be like, okay, I got to try to fix this. I've got to make it right. So, curious, defensive, or avoid the conversation. Where are you at when they bring up the objection?
All right, Brooke gave us another good question for some self-reflection. She's got a great tool to help with that even more, and that's her sales conversation assessment. So I encourage you to head over to buildingmomentum.info/assessment and take that. And somewhere between 5 or 7 minutes, you'll go through the questions and then get a report back that'll help you begin to know where you could take steps forward in your sales conversations. Brooke, we've been talking about this idea and we've been teasing that something's coming. Where are we headed next week? And what's the good news that's coming for people?
Yes. So next week, I'm going to give you one question that's going to be able to create space for your customers to share the concerns before they start becoming obstacles. I'm not saying we're not avoiding the objections. I'm going to help you to know how to be able to ask for them, to be able to give them the space to be able to share it. And it is a lot more simpler than you think. I promise.
Yeah, it's really good news. I've been trying to figure out what do we call this? Is this Brooke's $1 million sales question? This one question has helped you and a lot of your clients make a lot more sales because it takes a lot of the guessworking out of it. Until then, we hope you enjoy your week, enjoy your matcha, and make some more sales.
Bye-bye.